You might assume the hardest part of owning a yacht is finding $50 million to buy one. That's the number that gets people's attention. It sounds like the whole story. It isn't even close to the whole story. The purchase price of a yacht is closer to a down payment on a second life than it is to the final cost of anything. Once the wire transfer clears and the champagne gets poured on the dock, the real financial relationship is just beginning. And it doesn't behave like buying a car, a house, or a stock. It behaves like adopting an animal that needs feeding, medicine, and a full-time staff. Except the animal is made of steel, floats on salt water, and gets more expensive to keep alive the older it gets. That's the part almost nobody explains clearly. So let's start where the buyer starts, with a number that looks big enough to be the whole problem, and isn't. The number everyone gets wrong. Say you buy a yacht for $20 million. That figure feels final. It's the headline on the brokerage listing, the number your accountant reacts to, the thing your friends ask about. But inside the yachting industry, brokers, insurers, and management companies use a completely different number to describe what that boat will actually cost you, and they use it constantly, almost like a warning label. It's called the 10% rule.
The idea is simple and brutal. Expect to spend somewhere between 10 and 15% of your yacht's purchase price every single year just to keep it running. Not to upgrade it, not to make it nicer, just to keep it insured, crewed, fueled, docked, and mechanically alive. On a $20 million yacht, that's $2 to $3 million a year, year after year, indefinitely. That's not a one-time fee. It's a recurring bill roughly the size of a mid-sized company's annual payroll, attached permanently to an asset that, unlike a company, doesn't generate revenue by default. It just floats there, depreciating, waiting for its next invoice. Here's the detail that makes this rule far stranger than it first sounds. It isn't fixed. As the yacht ages and its market value drops, the actual dollar cost of crew, insurance, and maintenance doesn't drop with it. Those costs are tied to the size and complexity of the vessel, not to what a buyer would pay for it today. So, a yacht that cost $50 million new and is worth $30 million 8 years later doesn't become 40% cheaper to run. The $5 million annual bill that represented 10% of its value at purchase now represents closer to 17% of what the boat is actually worth. In other words, the percentage doesn't just apply to the boat, it applies to a shrinking target. The yacht gets cheaper, the bill doesn't. That single mechanical fact is the seed of almost everything that goes wrong in yacht ownership, and we'll come back to it because it's the hinge the entire chain reaction swings on. If you asked most people to guess the biggest line item in that annual bill, they'd say fuel. It's the obvious villain. A boat this size can burn through diesel at a rate that makes a private jet look economical. But fuel usually isn't even the top expense. On most yachts over roughly 100 feet, the single largest recurring cost is crew salaries. That reframes what you're actually buying. A yacht over a certain size legally requires a captain, engineers, deckhands, stewards, and often a chef. Not as a luxury add-on, but because international maritime regulations mandate minimum staffing based on the vessel's size and passenger capacity. A 180-foot superyacht can require a crew of 15 to 20 people, working essentially year-round, whether the owner sets foot on board twice a year or 20 times. So the product you bought isn't a boat, it's a payroll. You are, functionally, the owner-operator of a small maritime services company, except this company's only customer is you, and it loses money by design every single month it exists. Insurance adds another layer that surprises first-time owners. Premiums typically run close to 1 to 2% of the vessel's value annually, which sounds modest until you remember it's 1 to 2% of a number with 7 or 8 zeros, recalculated every renewal based on hull value, cruising region, and claims history. Add berthing fees that can run into hundreds of thousands of dollars a year at a prestige marina in the Mediterranean or the Caribbean during peak season. Routine maintenance that industry sources put at 5 to 10% of the yacht's value on its own, and you start to see why brokers don't sugarcoat this rule. It isn't a scare tactic. It's closer to an actuarial fact.
And that's the healthy scenario, a well-maintained, moderately used yacht in familiar waters. Push the age of the vessel up, take it to remote cruising grounds, or run it hard, and the range doesn't creep toward 15%. It can climb toward 20, even 25. That raises an obvious question. If the ongoing math is this punishing, why doesn't everyone who can afford the purchase price immediately walk away the moment they see the operating budget? The instinct to make the boat pay for itself. The instinct almost every new owner has, once the 10% number sinks in, is the same: rent it out. If the yacht is going to sit unused most of the year anyway, why not charter it to other wealthy travelers and offset some of that brutal annual bill? On paper, this looks like the obvious fix. Charter rates for a large crude yacht can run anywhere from tens of thousands to well over $1 million a week, depending on size and season. Run a boat for 8 or 10 weeks a year on the charter market, and you can genuinely claw back a meaningful chunk of your operating costs. But this is exactly where the second hidden mechanism kicks in, and it's one most buyers don't discover until they're already committed. The moment a yacht starts earning charter income, it stops being purely a private possession and starts being, in the eyes of tax authorities, insurers, and maritime regulators, a commercial vessel. That reclassification triggers different, and often stricter, safety certification requirements, different insurance categories, different crew licensing standards, and different tax treatment depending on jurisdiction. In some cases, it can unlock useful depreciation benefits. In others, it creates compliance costs that eat into the very revenue the chartering was supposed to generate. There's also a physical cost that's easy to underestimate. Charter guests are harder on a yacht than an owner ever is. More engine hours, more wear on interiors, more turnover cleaning, more insurance claims. The boat that's supposed to be subsidizing itself is simultaneously aging faster because of the exact activity meant to pay for it. So, the charter strategy doesn't eliminate the 10% problem. It converts it into a different, more complicated problem, one that requires the owner to essentially run a hospitality business on the side, with all the operational headaches that implies, in exchange for partially offsetting costs on an asset that's still losing value every year regardless. Which brings us to the part of this system almost nobody accounts for going in. Depreciation isn't just a number on paper. It's the force that eventually turns a manageable annual bill into a full-blown financial trap. The depreciation trap and how it collapses. Here's the chain reaction, laid out in order, because each step makes the next one almost inevitable. A yacht is purchased at full price. Immediately, like a car driven off a dealership lot, it begins losing value, often losing a meaningful chunk of its worth within the first few years, and continuing to depreciate steadily after that, with quality builders holding value noticeably better than mass market ones. As that value falls, the fixed costs of ownership, crew, insurance baselines, dockage, mandated safety equipment stay essentially flat, because none of those costs are actually tied to what the boat would sell for today. They're tied to its size and systems. That mismatch means the effective percentage of value burn rate rises every year, even if the owner spends the exact same number of dollars. An owner who budgeted carefully at purchase, expecting to spend 10% annually, can find themselves 5 or 8 years later spending closer to 15 or 17% of the yacht's now lower market value, without ever having changed their spending habits at all. The boat didn't get more expensive, it got less valuable while staying just as expensive. Faced with that rising percentage, owners under financial pressure make a predictable choice. They start deferring the expensive stuff. Skip a scheduled engine overhaul this year. Push back the haul out and repaint. Delay replacing an aging system instead of doing it proactively. In the short term, this feels like smart cost control. It isn't. Deferred maintenance on a vessel doesn't just sit there waiting to be dealt with later, it compounds. The way skipping oil changes on a car eventually turns a maintenance bill into an engine replacement. And this is where the trap fully closes. When that owner eventually needs or wants to sell, because of a change in finances, a change in interest, or simply the realization that the annual bill has become unsustainable, the yacht doesn't just carry normal market depreciation anymore. It carries a maintenance backlog that surveyors will find, that buyers will negotiate against, and that can knock a disproportionate amount off the asking price relative to what it would have cost to simply keep up in the first place. The end result is an asset that was expensive to buy, expensive to run, and disappointing to sell. Sold not on the owner's schedule, but on the schedule forced by the accumulating math. That's not a hypothetical. It's close to the exact shape of the most famous, most documented yacht sale of the last decade. In 2014, a Malaysian financier named Low Taik Joe, widely known as Joe Low, had a 300-foot superyacht built by the Dutch yard shipyard Oceanco, with interiors designed by the British firm Winch Design. The vessel, named Equanimity, reportedly cost around $250 million, and it became one of the most visible symbols of a lifestyle that included parties attended by celebrities and a level of spending that eventually drew the attention of investigators in multiple countries. The money behind it, prosecutors in Malaysia and the United States alleged, had been siphoned from 1MDB, Malaysia's state investment fund, in one of the largest financial scandals of the decade. In 2018, acting on that investigation, authorities located and seized the Equanimity in Bali, Indonesia, working jointly with American investigators.
What followed was not a quick resolution. The yacht sat impounded for months while ownership disputes and legal proceedings played out across 2 countries. And this is where the operating cost mechanism we've been describing stopped being theoretical and started being measured in real invoices. With no owner using it, no charter income coming in, and no revenue offsetting anything, the Malaysian government still had to pay to keep a 300-foot yacht alive, crew, docking, basic maintenance, the entire time it sat as evidence. A spokesperson for Joe Low later cited upkeep costs during roughly 8 months of impoundment at close to $3.5 million. A figure that, whatever the political framing around it, illustrates a fact independent of anyone's guilt or innocence. A yacht costs real money to simply exist, whether anyone is enjoying it or not. When Malaysia finally put the Equanimity up for sale in late 2018, it set a minimum price around $130 million, roughly half the original build cost. Even at that steep discount, buyers weren't rushing in. The auction process dragged on for months without meeting the reserve. Eventually, in April 2019, the Malaysian government negotiated directly with the casino and hospitality company Genting Malaysia, which purchased the vessel for $126 million, just under half of what it reportedly cost to build 5 years earlier.
Every mechanism from earlier in this script shows up in that outcome. The purchase price was never the real cost. The ongoing bill kept accruing even while the boat sat idle and unable to generate revenue. The asset depreciated hard and fast, cut nearly in half in 5 years, even before accounting for the unusual circumstances of the sale. And the forced nature of the sale, a government needing to recover money on a legal timeline, not a private owner choosing the ideal moment, meant the yacht sold for less than even its already discounted reserve price initially suggested it might. Genting didn't just buy a boat either. It bought the exact tool a smart operator uses to fight this cost structure. It immediately renamed the vessel Tranquility and put it into the charter market, reportedly earning over $1 million a week from clients wanting the 91-meter yacht, effectively turning what had been a liability into a revenue-generating hospitality asset, the professionalized version of the same charter strategy an individual owner might attempt on a smaller scale, but run by a company built to absorb the operational complexity that sinks amateurs. That contrast, an individual owner drowning under an asset's carrying costs versus a hospitality company turning the same asset into a functioning business, is really the whole story of how the yacht industry evolved to survive its own economics.
The 10% rule and the depreciation trap aren't secrets. Everyone in the yachting world, brokers, shipyards, insurers, knows exactly how punishing this math is for a private individual trying to manage it alone. So, an entire layer of the industry exists specifically to sell owners relief from having to do it themselves. Yacht management companies now handle crew hiring, insurance renewals, maintenance scheduling, and regulatory compliance for a fee, effectively becoming the middle manager of an owner's floating company so the owner doesn't have to be. Fractional ownership structures let multiple buyers split the purchase price and the annual burn rate of a single vessel, trading full-time access for a dramatically smaller bill. And the charter brokerage industry has grown into a genuine hospitality sector in its own right, matching idle yachts with paying guests the way short-term rental platforms match idle homes with paying tenants, except with maritime licensing, safety certification, and insurance stakes that make a bad Airbnb review look trivial by comparison. None of these solutions eliminate the underlying economics. They just repackage them. The 10% doesn't go away. It gets distributed, professionalized, or partially offset, but somebody, somewhere in that chain, is still paying it because the boat still needs a crew, still needs fuel, still needs insurance, and still loses value every single year whether anyone is having a good time on the back deck or not.
In the best-case version of yacht ownership, a buyer goes in with real numbers instead of the sticker price. Budgets for the full 10 to 15%, builds in a maintenance reserve instead of deferring, uses a reputable management company, and treats any charter income as a bonus rather than a lifeline. That owner can genuinely enjoy the asset for years, sell it in a reasonable market window, and absorb the depreciation as the acknowledged cost of the experience. Similar to how a private jet owner accepts that the plane will never be a financial asset, only an extremely expensive convenience. The realistic negative version looks like the Equanimity, minus the international fraud investigation. An owner who underestimated the annual burn, deferred maintenance to manage the pain, watched the resale value collapse faster than expected, and ended up selling under pressure at a steep discount to an entity better equipped to run it as an actual business. Both outcomes start from the exact same number on the exact same brokerage lister. What separates them isn't the price of the boat. It's whether the buyer understood from day one what that price actually was. A down payment, not a total.
So go back to the assumption we started with, that the expensive part of owning a yacht is buying it. That was never true, and once you see the mechanism clearly, it's obvious why. The purchase price is a one-time event. Everything that actually determines whether ownership succeeds or fails, the crew payroll, the insurance recalculated every year against a shrinking asset, the maintenance you can defer but never truly avoid, the depreciation curve that turns your own boat into your biggest financial risk, all of that happens after the sale closes, continuously, for as long as you own the thing. A yacht doesn't function economically like a car, a home, or an investment. It functions like a subscription with no cancellation button that gets more expensive in relative terms every year you keep paying it. A recurring lifestyle charge disguised as a single purchase. The entire ecosystem around yachting, from management companies to charter brokers to fractional ownership schemes, exists for one reason: to help people manage a build that never actually stops, on an asset that's guaranteed to be worth less every single time it comes due.